It's time to turn down the noise and tune in to News You Can Use, the show that gives you a quick insight into the latest twists and turns in healthcare news, where every diagnosis comes with an order of side-splitting humor. Your hosts are Dr. Nick, a longtime host, innovator, and healthcare wizard who can prescribe a digital dose of innovation to cure even the most ailing operational inefficiencies. And Dr. Craig Joseph, the healthcare guru who can diagnose both patient and software glitches with equal precision, making sure hospitals run smoother than a well-oiled robot doc. So buckle up, because we're diving into the ER of excitement, the ICU of irrationality, and the waiting room of wacky wisdom. Now here's Dr. Nick and Dr. Craig.
Welcome to the month of August. I'm Dr. Nick.
And I'm Dr. Craig.
This week, we will be dissecting the latest healthcare news, unraveling the twists and turns, and making sense of the debacles.
Just remember, life's a lot like a breaking news story. Unpredictable, often absurd, and occasionally leaves you wondering if it's all just a cosmic prank.
This week, we take a look at systemness. Wonder what that is. Round trips and the Epic UGM.
And we also dive into payer management and rent control and voter registration. I'm sorry, Dr. Nick, we're talking about voter registration today?
Yes, we are. But first off this week, we're going to dive into Epic's research on Cosmos and heart disease. So, picking up from recent publication from the Cosmos, we saw a note come out that I think both you and I have been fans of some of the content that comes out, but this one I think tickled us both in a slightly different way, in part because we're aging old boys. Just going to say, or at least I speak for myself. Maybe
no, you're correct. I will not correct you there. This is accurate. We are aging old boys.
And what happens to aging old folks is they die of the, is the four horsemen. I don't know how many horsemen there are now, but one of them is cardiac disease. And, we face that off and try and combat that. I know you certainly are doing that. I certainly have. I think I've been pretty public about some of the things that I'm trying to manage as part of that. But in this particular instance, the Cosmos database, as we put it, had a different view of what might be the appropriate therapy and came out with something. Do you want to tell us what we saw?
Yeah, so just if we take a step back, Epic is a big vendor of electronic health records, and many of the very largest healthcare systems in this country and in many other countries use Epic, and many of them, I think the majority of them, contribute de-identified data to a big database, and Epic calls that Cosmos. And so if you contribute to it, then you can leverage it. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But one of the ways that Epic tries to leverage all of this information on hundreds of millions of people is by putting out research, and I'm putting that in air quotes, even though this is a podcast and you can't see that. It's not peer reviewed.
Oh, research. Behave!
It's not. This is not research that is of the quality that would be in a journal. It's basically there to kind of pique your interest and to show trends, and if someone's interested in the academic world, they can go and follow up and do a more thorough job. Anyway, this piece of interesting information, at least the way it was presented and you and I interpreted, was looking at the levels of HDL, which we usually call the good cholesterol. And
there is no good and bad cholesterol. I'm just going to channel a little bit of my Peter Attia podcast. There is no. Anyway, go on. Sorry.
All right. All cholesterol is evil, but HDL is less evil than LDL. Yeah. And so LDL is usually the one that most of us, if we have a cardiologist or a primary care doctor who's interested in that, they want that LDL to be low. And we know why, of course. The lower, at least once you get to a low point with LDL, your risk of having a heart attack or other cardiac problem goes down. We know this to be true. And the question that a couple of Epic researchers asked was, well, what happens? And again, they have data. They have hundreds of millions of patients. Can you go too low? And let's specifically talk about, LDL. Once it gets below a certain point, does your risk of having a heart problem increase? Which is really a question I've never thought of, because it's very difficult to get it at least very, very low in my experience. And they're and again, I think calling it research is more than they would want, but their look at the data seem to indicate that there are numbers with LDL specifically, that if you get lower than some number, your risk of having a heart problem goes up. And I commented to you privately when I first read this, that my cardiologist would like, I think, my LDL to be -10.
Yes, yeah.
0
You and me both.
is not low enough for my cardiologist.
Keep going.
Yeah, keep going. He wants me to be spitting out cholesterol.
Yep.
Yeah, or coming out of my skin or something. So and we never really got a good answer as to why it would be. Looking at some of their graphs for coronary artery disease specifically, it seems that once you get below, I don't know, 80, 60, it's your risk of having coronary artery disease goes up based on their data. And so it was a little weird, and you and I kind of tried to get more clarification via social media, but really didn't get very far. I thought it was interesting. As you know, we regularly bring up this information that this quote unquote research, and because it's interesting. It's interesting. I would say it's interesting, but not actionable, right? Like no one's gonna change what they're doing based on this information. You'd want a formal study.
So I think you're right that it's not actionable, in part because it's not a formal study. There's no randomized, fishing out of a database. But that said, the publication of it has a tendency to sort of stimulate folks to say, oh, I should not do, or I should do, the following as a result of that, because, gosh, I'm seeing it. And, this is correlation causation at its core. There's, a bunch of reasons why that particular instance troubled both you and I, not least of all from the personal standpoint where we've got somebody else telling us something completely different. Let's be clear. I clearly don't want it at 0, but I certainly want it to be as low as possible, because I buy the published research and where we are in terms of that. I think it did what it was expected to do based on how you described the outline, which is generate a conversation, which is good. Right. Albeit in this particular instance, I'm going to say the conversation is no. But what worries me a little bit is that, maybe there are other folks, I don't know. I think anybody can sign up for this. So if you're receiving that information and you receive that, and that becomes an actionable activity, that worries me. I've got to say a little bit, because I think it's, it worries me not as much, but along the same lines as advertising for pharmaceuticals. And I feel like that's the only adverts that I ever see, and I don't see a lot. I skip through them, but that's almost all I ever see. And I worry a lot about that, because it's not doing anybody any favors. I think the EPIC research or Cosmo, I'm not sure what to call it now that you've called out the research piece, but I think it offers value, but it needs to come, does it have a disclaimer? I've never really looked. I read it with, everyone that shows up, not all of them, but they're good. Maybe it should come with a disclaimer, but is that enough? I don't know. I'm struggling with this particular instance.
Yeah, it's got some words in there, and it's certainly available.
No, really?
No, there are words.
Oh, groundbreaking thoughts.
They're English words, and they have nouns and verbs and stuff. They got all the kinds of words in there. This is information that's available to anyone. I think it's ideally focused on healthcare practitioners, and again, not to take action yet just to spur conversation, and then to have someone say, well, we should maybe think about looking into this more formally. So
Yes.
your point's well taken. I do wish that there were some some organized way, and maybe this is a suggestion if anyone from Epic is listening, that we could put comments and kind of have a back and forth about these individual things, so that, because let's acknowledge that you and I are not experts in research protocols or statistics or any of that. We are experts in our own cholesterol levels and our experiences with our own cardiologist.
I'm not even sure that I am an expert, given how bad it's been at times.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, moving on, we're staying with Epic because the UGM just took place, and I certainly saw some materials coming out of it. I didn't personally attend, but always a focal point, a lot of interest. Everybody gets into the spaceship that's underground, and it's a big setting now compared to how it used to be. You perhaps have a little bit more.
No, I actually attended this year. I was lucky enough to go into that spaceship.
I'm still struggling with this. How the hell do they let you in? It's just, is nobody watching the doors or the gates here?
I wear a disguise, Dr. Nick. Mostly, I can't get into any more details, but I wear a disguise. Also, I have certain technologies around me to make me invisible to cameras. And so there's a lot there.
He has an invisibility cloak.
I don't want to really get into it right now, but let's just go with that. I attended Epic's user group meeting. That's what UGM is. And it was great fun. And it's a 3-day event. At least this year. It used to be 4 days where, and again, Epic's a vendor that software vendor that creates the electronic health record software tools that almost, I think it's now above 51% of hospitals and healthcare systems with respect to how many patients they take care of now use. So most of us have probably, actually, I think that's clear. The majority of Americans have a record in Epic somewhere at some time, whether you know it or not. Anyway, there were two things that I wanted to call out that I thought were pretty amazing. One was artificial intelligence or AI. And Epic announced that certainly they've been working on AI, as has everyone, but that they've got over 100 projects in flight. That's a lot for them. That leverage AI from finding out, giving you a better idea about when the next appointment can be, and not just asking you a ton of questions or having a scheduler ask you those questions, but hey, we noticed that this person always likes to schedule on Tuesdays in the afternoon. Maybe that's the first suggestion that we'll make, is Tuesday in the afternoon. No one has to tell it that; it just kind of learns that. And again, it reminds me, if you have Tuesday afternoons off, that's when you're going to make your doctor and dental appointments. And so that kind of thing, which many of us don't really think of AI, but I think that can be very helpful. Just one example. Another one that we've talked about a lot is ambient listening in the office setting. So you go to see your doctor, and in the exam room, there's a microphone there. Might just be a phone, actually. And with your permission, it records the voices of everyone in the room and then generates a lot of cool things. This is actually, so it certainly generates a note for the doctor. The question is, how good of a note is it? How much work does the doctor have to do? I think that's getting better and better. It actually works today, that if I'm in the exam room and I say, so Nick, we're going to order an LDL cholesterol and an HDL cholesterol, and I'd like to go up on your rosuvastatin from 20 to 30 milligrams a day, and we'll get you a 90-day supply of that with 3
Wait, were you listening into my last consult?
I do. Well, I've tunneled into your phone, but that's a different conversation altogether. If I say those things, and if we have the software configured correctly, and if we have the electronic health record configured, a lot of ifs there, but if those things are all in line, which they're not a lot of the time, but if they are, then those orders are sitting there waiting for me
Yeah.
to sign. Let's be clear. They're not active orders. The AI is not sending them off, but they're right there queued up for me. It's amazing.
I think, absolutely great opportunity, automation, some of the drudgery. Let's be clear. This is, I know that's what I want, but I got to go then find, hunt and click and whatever. My question here is, as I'm hearing you talk about that, that feels like products, and, you specifically talk to Ambient. That's a product from a large organization now under Microsoft, and indeed a bridge, at least two, and there's several others. Is this competing directly with them, or is this integration with these?
No, at this point, it's integration. I asked that question
it's okay. Too. All right. So it's a function that's coming from other participants, partners.
Correct. They just interface in, and there are dozens and dozens of these, sometimes small, sometimes large. The biggest one you didn't mention, which was Nuance, and now owned by Microsoft. So,
well, I did. I mentioned Microsoft, but Nuance is absorbed, right?
Absorbed. Yep. Yes, you are correct. So there are big and small groups that are doing this, and I don't believe Epic is doing it yet. But hold on. They tend to get into those things after a while.
Yeah, they do. That's true.
So a lot of cool and interesting things that will help both the patient and the physician and other clinicians and registration folks and scheduling folks and revenue cycle folks. So a lot there. The other thing I kind of wanted to call out, which we've already talked about to some extent, but more leveraging of that Cosmos database. And again, as I mentioned, Cosmos is where many of Epic's customers, not all, but many, deliver de-identified data into one single database that Epic can then can kind of do crazy things with. And so just as an idea about how big this is, there was an article that I read where a researcher said, I would like to see how many patients with Down syndrome are in Cosmos, and came back. And again, let's be clear, these are de-identified data. So this researcher doesn't get a list of names, just gets a number. And the number was about 100,000. Wow. And the comment from her when she first saw that I read in the article was, well, we think there are 200,000 patients with Down syndrome in the US. And Epic has just identified half of them in its database. And again, not every Epic customer is contributing to this database.
Jives with the number that you shared. In fact, that they have 51%, right?
It's just I say these words, but it's spooky. It's spooky, yeah. And so they've started kind of leveraging it again as a starting point, as a jumping off point. Like, is there some correlation between having Down syndrome and this other thing? And they were actually interested in skin diseases. And so I think it's just very, very helpful. Two new products, I think, that are functionalities that Epic is coming out with. One is Find Patients Like Mine. So Nick, if you're sitting there and I don't know,
that's a product, that's a website. patientslikeme.com, just saying, but go on.
But this has a lot more information, right?
Of course it does.
Yeah.
You've got 51%.
Right. So, and then saying, hey, patients like this, what do they seem to respond to?
Right.
And says, oh, well, patients who had this lab that was abnormal was high and now it's gone low are on this kind of blood pressure lowering medicine. And again, no causation here, simply saying that these things seem to be correlated. Doctor, you should look into it. So pretty interesting and exciting. It's really not ready for prime time yet, but moving on, it's going to get there.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have time to cover another aspect of this that I think I would love to know. And if somebody would like to comment, I'd certainly hear. But de-identification of data, extremely challenging. Having been to DEF CON and saw a specific presentation that essentially said between 8 and 10 items that I need about you that I can uniquely identify. And I think it's now down to 6 to 8. Huge challenge, especially with medical data, let's be clear, but we don't have time for that, unfortunately. Moving on swiftly, recent actions on the part of the government to go after RealPage, which is a group and application that helps landlords. I'm going to say set prices. I want to be careful that I don't overstep the boundaries of what that means, but essentially, there is a lawsuit now pending suggesting that this is, for want of another term, price fixing. And that's not medical, but what really struck me, and clearly some other folks that comment in this space, Mr. Histork called this out, but I saw that as well. Very similar to products that do a similar kind of thing. In this case, multi-plan for payers, and says, this is what you could get, this is what you should potentially discount. And, it always bothers me, this sort of what I can only describe as surge pricing, for abbreviation terms, of, procedures and activities. While there's some variability, if you're getting a medical procedure done, you should have some sense of the pricing. And if they're going after the rent activity, maybe they might start going after the payer controls or payer fixing of prices, is the suggestion. Thoughts?
Well, it is a slippery slope, and let's be clear that the Department of Justice is going after someone or a group doesn't mean that they're going to be convicted of anything.
No.
Or even more formally accused. So yeah, it's concerning, and I think it's an area worth exploring and watching. Just like that company that says, "Hey, this is what we think your rent should be. Hey, landlord, this is what we think based on all the information we have." But if they're the ones giving everyone that information,
right?
Yeah, they're kind of setting the price, and then they're also getting rewarded, right? And it's not a flat fee, so they're the higher the rent, the more that they're getting paid. And in the same way, the higher a third party says, "Hey, for this as an insurance company, I think you should just offer them this, because they'll probably take this, because we know a lot about them, whoever they are. It's usually a hospital or a big
reminds me a lot of ticket prices for concerts and some of that stuff that's going on. Anyway, moving on. Unfortunately, we're running rapidly out of time. Systemness and round trips. I got to say, I was intrigued when you brought this up.
Yeah, it was just a short article from a chief medical officer at Atrium, and basically talked about the program whereby patients were waiting for surgeries because they could only happen at the big mothership hospital, which has all the kind of sophisticated equipment. But they were delayed because even though they had smaller hospitals out in the community or a little further away, they couldn't do the surgeries there. And what they found is that they could safely and effectively and efficiently have the surgery at the big mothership hospital, and then immediately put that patient in an ambulance and send them to one of the smaller hospitals closer to their homes, closer to the patient's home, where they could safely recover. And it sounds pretty easy and straightforward, but it gets really complicated really fast. You have to have the right folks and right equipment and right lab facilities and all of that.
The idea of an ambulance trip, long ambulance trip, after some, major stuff. I mean, I like the principle, freeing up the resources, but I'd want some real comfort issues to be resolved. Certainly my experiences in the back of ambulances, and to be clear, that's not as a patient. I don't think I've ever been, but I've rode along, which I'm going to say was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, no, it has to be done right. And looks like they've kind of figured it out, at least for them, for the surgeries that they're taking care of. So yeah, you're right. There's a lot of, you need to make sure pain's under control and it's safe and all of that stuff.
All right, final topic. We promised it. Voter registration. There was a lot of fuss over this, or it would appear there was fuss over it, that the Epic application was, the EMR was encouraging illegal voter registration. I'm going to say it out the gate. That wasn't what was going on. This was legitimate. Hey, we can register in the same way that you can be registered at a driver's license. It was facilitating, but any thoughts, closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is absolutely an innocent attempt at to try to get people to register, and in the same way that sometimes you can register in a shopping mall or at other places, like you said, driver's license or post offices. This was another opportunity. It had nothing to do with the EHR specifically. It was just a kind of reminder in the EHR pushing. Someone pressed a button and then they could go in and the patient, if they were there and if they had time, could answer questions. And if the questions all aligned up, then they could put in their name to register. Or if there was an online system that was offered by the state, they would be directly. They just directly went to that. So no, this was someone.
Fake news. I'm just going to say fake news.
Yeah. It's
dear Lord,
making a mountain out of a molehill. There's nothing there.
Oh well. All right, so we find ourselves, as usual, at the end of another episode where we explored some of healthcare's mysteries before they became your emergencies. Until next time, I'm Dr. Nick.
And I'm Dr. Craig.